graph work, where we shall see how we get the data and then we use that data to analyze different scientific concepts. Okay? Yes. Now, like I said, if you check on biology, paper 2, bio, paper 2, it has two sections, section A and section B. Okay? Now, my emphasis on section A. Section A is simply one number like this, but the one number carries 40 marks. Now, for you to be able to scoop these 40 marks, yes, you need to know the science, you need to have basic scientific knowledge, but it's not just about the science. It is your analytic abilities, how you are able to observe data, depending on which data that is given, and then you make conclusions basing on the data that is given. And then you relate the data to a given scientific concept. So if you can do that with ease, trust me, you'll be able to scoop some good marks on number one, even when you are not, even when the concept is really tough, even when it has been picked from some serious concept. So now, let's see, what is that scientific method? What's that animal called scientific method? Now, it is simply a way to ask. For example, you see something and then be like, damn it, how is this even like this? Hmm? In physics, they usually like that story of the apple and Newton. Is it Newton, the guy who discovered gravity? I guess so. The man was just under an apple tree, and from nowhere, the apple hit him. The apple fell onto him. And so, just from that, the guy asked himself that, why? What the? I don't want to say it, but why? Hmm? Why is this apple falling downwards? Why isn't it going up? Okay? So you begin by asking yourself questions. Why is this like this? Not the other way around. How is this is? What? Why? Why is this like this? Okay? And then after asking your question, then you provide answers to that question. But now the answers, they shouldn't be just abstract. You cannot sleep and dream about a scientific concept. Actually, all this science that we've been studying, both biology, chemistry, all these concepts, that's how they have been developed. Somebody sits, asks himself or herself a question, and then goes in a lab to carry out research and come up with a conclusion. Okay? So even here, you ask questions about something, and then you provide answers by number one, carrying out experiments. You go in a lab, carry out experiments. We are going to see how these experiments are conducted. And then when you carry out experiments, obviously you expect some observations. So you have to observe something. Okay? There must be changes. There must be something that is observed. And when we talk about observation, we use all our five senses. When you say observation, usually concentrate on what you see. No, observations are not simply what you see. You can use your eyes, you can use your ears, you can use your tongue, you can use your skin to feel, and finally your nose. All your five senses are used. And then from these observations, that's when you try to create sense out of these observations. You ask yourself, why is this like this? Okay? Why is this like this? You try to connect your scientific concepts, your concepts. Okay? And you try to draw conclusions out of it. And when you make a conclusion finally, you'll be like, yeah, that is why this is like this. You can imagine when Newton finally discovered gravity. I was like, yeah, that's why this apple is falling downwards. Okay? I used to, there's some meme which was running on social media that before Newton discovered gravity, I think things never used to fall down. I think so. You jump, you continue. You throw a stone, it continues upwards. You cut a leaf or you cut a fruit, it just goes up. But when Newton discovered gravity, that's when things began to fall down. But that's just a social media meme, so don't take it serious. Now, for you to make research, for you to carry out any experiment in order to gather data, to analyze and make conclusions, there are steps you have to follow. Okay? There are steps that you have to follow. Number one, you look at something and then you ask yourself questions. And then when you finally decide to go in a lab, you state the problem. The problem is what your research is going to solve. Okay? You identify the problem and then you make certain observations that can probably lead to that problem. For example, you can have a look at this. You know, we have different distributions of plants. Now I'm taking you. I'll pick different concepts. I'll pick different concepts so that we can study this as a whole. So here, somebody has told you that carbon dioxide concentration can affect the productivity of agricultural crops. Maybe somebody is a farmer and somebody has had a rumor that you need to be mindful of where you are planting your crops. Be mindful of carbon dioxide concentration. Okay? And where you are planting your crops. And so you, the scientist, you cannot base on the rumors. You be like, no, you have to go in a lab or you have to carry out the real experiment, okay? To really confirm to us that really carbon dioxide concentration affects the productivity of different crops. And keeping in mind the little science that you have. Okay? You know that we have C4 plants, you know that we have C3 plants, and CAM plants, the crucial acid metabolism plants. So keeping in mind that, okay, you shouldn't just deduce anyhow, but rather you go in a lab and you carry out. So you first identify the problem. And the problem in this case is really, does carbon dioxide concentration affect the productivity of agricultural crops? And some books, or not only some books, but the problem is the same as the hypothesis. What your research actually is intending to cover. Okay? Actually, the hypothesis is the next. So, the hypothesis, the other one was a problem, what your research is intending to cover. But now the hypothesis is the alternative, the two possible results actually. You are asking yourself that, does really carbon dioxide concentration affect productivity of crops? Now you have two possible answers, and the first one is either a yes, carbon dioxide concentration affects the productivity, and obviously the other one, carbon dioxide concentration has no effect. Okay, and those two are your hypotheses, and hypotheses must be testable. Don't look for ambiguous, complex, perplex hypotheses which cannot be tested. Like somebody be like, man, if you sleeping leads to passing of exams. How are you going to test that? But you can find ways. So your hypothesis must be testable. For example, let's see. From the other previous example, from our problem, we can state our two hypotheses. And the first alternative or the first answer might be yes. Okay? Yes. Atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration affects the productivity of agricultural crops. Okay? And the other one, obviously it's a no. And usually it is called a null hypothesis, which is usually represented as HO, HZ. Carbon dioxide concentration does not really affect the productivity of crops. And so from these two statements, then that's how you're going to carry out an experiment. Now that's when you go in a lab and carry out the real experiment. But still you have to design your experiment so that your results are not questionable. Okay? You create a plan. An experiment is carefully created. You create situations that will test your hypothesis, your problem. And you should make sure that your experiment is not questionable. Okay? And so the first thing you need to have, number one, you need to have the experimental groups. And these are the real specimens that are subjected to the factor in question. For example, you've said carbon dioxide concentration affects productivity. So you have different groups of crops, and these crops are subjected to different carbon dioxide concentrations. Boom. And then you test your hypothesis. You need to have variables, and the variables are categorized into two types. Whereby number one, you have the independent variable, or you can refer to it as manipulated variable, and the dependent variable, or the responding variable. Now these two variables, the independent, this one is on its own and you can easily manipulate it, okay, when carrying out an experiment. For example, still on our experiment, does carbon dioxide concentration affects the productivity of crops? So the two variables are, number one, carbon dioxide concentration. Okay, let me use square brackets. Let me borrow some chemistry. Square brackets means concentration. That's one variable. And another variable is productivity. Okay, it is productivity. You also need to find how you're going to determine the productivity. Now, of these two variables, the carbon dioxide concentration and productivity, which one depends on the other? Which one can easily be manipulated? And which one affects the other? That when you change this, then automatically the other one must change. For instance, if you change carbon dioxide concentration, is the productivity going to change? Keeping in mind the theory part. If you change productivity, the question is how am I even going to change the productivity? I don't even know. Is carbon dioxide concentration going to change? I don't know. So those are the two factors, the independent, the one which can be manipulated so that you see its effects on the other variable, and then the dependent variable, the one that depends, the one that responds to the changes in the independent variable. Then the experiment must have control groups. Okay? Control groups. We are going to see what control groups are. And finally, you need to have constants. And you are going to see what constants actually are. Yeah, so somebody is asking that why is a hypothesis also called a tentative answer? Now, like we said, the hypothesis is the probable answer to the question, to the problem at hand. And like we said, it can either be a null hypothesis or an alternative hypothesis. Now, it's a tentative answer because it's what you feel, what you think the problem is, or the answer to the problem is. Maybe it could involve feelings, it could involve, that's how you feel the answer to the problem is. But it's still a hypothesis until when experiments are conducted and the observations, the analysis, they come up to support the hypothesis. That's when you take it as the answer to the question. That was brilliant. Any other question?